Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. I'm a tabletop game designer, a lover of history, and a lifelong player of Age of Empires 2. And on this series, Theorycrafting, I take civilizations and units not yet present in AoE2 and try my best to implement a believable design for how they might look if they were added to the game as we know it today. In this episode, we will be concluding my Celtic trifecta, breaking down the three foremost Celtic kingdoms of the British Isles and removing the current silly and inaccurate Celts from the game entirely. You know what it's going to be. I've been hinting at it for a while. And so, without further ado, I am very pleased to present to you now the Irish. Yes, indeed, the Irish, a levy and monk civilization. If you don't know what levy means, you're probably new to the channel. Levy is my term for trash units, namely military units, infantry, archers, cavalry that do not cost gold. Before we jump into the build, if you want to see any disclaimers that I have regarding this process or my philosophy when doing theory crafting, please make sure to take a look on the screen. Additionally, as a brief announcement, this coming Sunday, July 16th at noon Eastern Daylight Time, I will be streaming the third ever Theorycraft, where I visit past builds and I implement changes based on comments that you fine people have given me down in the comments section below. Speaking of which, if you want to see a comprehensive civilization document for this Irish build, including all of my sources, please make sure to take a look down below in the description. With all that being said, let's get a move on to Irish history. Ireland has been settled since well into the Neolithic era. Between the 300s and 400s BC, it had a number of living centers, though none of them particularly massive. It's been Celtic since at least 300 BC, but that's also well before the AoE2 relevant timeframe, so let's skip ahead to 400 AD, which I have as the semi-arbitrary cutoff for the beginning of the AoE2 relevant timeframe. Around this time, we see the rise of Ireland's most famous and impactful clan dynasty across its entire history, the mighty Ineil clan, which you might know better as the O'Neills. You might know a couple O'Neills in your day-to-day life yourself. And their progenitor ruled in the late 300s, leaving the family plenty of influence in the country more broadly come the 400s and beyond. The O'Neills came from the north of Ireland in the province of Ulster, but they only ever truly conquered and held half the country. Ireland has for a very long time been divided into 5 major provinces, namely Ulster in the north, Connaught in the west, Munster in the southwest, Leinster in the southeast, and Meath in like the central east-ish area. And while the O'Neills came from Ulster, they ruled out of Meath in the traditional court city of Tara. So let's skip ahead to the 500s AD, where the Irish discover Christianity. They were the first established Christians of the entirety of the British Isles and were very effective at spreading their new faith to their neighbors, leading to them having quite a profound influence over peoples like the Picts in the north and the Welsh and Anglo-Saxons in the south. Ireland had raided and traded and intermarried with these peoples for a very long time, as well as emigrating fairly frequently to the larger island, which, among other things, resulted in the founding of the Kingdom of Dalriata in southwestern Scotland, which would go on to become the Kingdom of Scotland that we would see later in the Middle Ages. Go check out my video on the Scots up here if you haven't seen it yet. But beyond this, the Irish would later go on to educate almost every noble that came out of the British Isles. Why? Because the Irish developed an incredibly effective and robust monastic tradition that included secular education, allowing nobles of all stripes and backgrounds to send their youth to be tutored under Irish monks to return to their home countries as more effective leaders, often bringing Christianity with them. The Irish even started to attract the attention of the papacy, though we're too far flung to really have all that much clout. But this brings us all the way to the late 700s AD, where the holy island of Lindisfarne was attacked by Danes or Norwegians, not really clear which, kicking off the beginning of the Viking Age. Lindisfarne, though it is on the east coast of England, was actually an Irish monastery at the time, which gives you a pretty good idea of the extent of their monastic efforts. Vikings started to scatter themselves all across the Isles, and some of the first that the Irish interacted with were the Norwegian peoples who settled the Isles of Skye off the western coast of Scotland. The Irish fought and raided and traded and blah-de-blah-de-blah with them, but much more impactful was the coming of the Danes out of the south. Initially arriving only as raiders, the Danes would start to take port settlements in the county of Leinster in the southeast, eventually moving in more formally, sending out raiding parties and conquering armies deeper and deeper into the greater country. But they were held at bay, at least in part. No more than half of Ireland was ever brought under Danish control, and because of that, they never had enough influence or centralization to impose a Danelaw and take full control of the country. And they traded influence and power back and forth pretty substantially over the next couple hundred years. But finally, by about 960, Danish influence began to break. And at the climactic Battle of Clontarf, the High King Brian Boru, the first High King of all Ireland in almost 600 years, defeated the Danes in battle and sent them packing, though he himself died in the process. Don't worry, we'll be learning a little bit more about him later on. And this brought Ireland to the end of the Viking Age, leading to a golden age that would last almost 150 years. During this time, Ireland underwent a number of religious and social reforms, both trying to set up more official dioceses and further its ties with Rome, but also trying to kind of reform its image. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work, which, as we'll see, would lead to more substantial and severe ramifications later down the line. But at least they didn't have to worry about Vikings anymore after the Battle of Clontarf, leading to Ireland having full control of its country for the rest of time. Good, just a little joke, pardon me, because what's that over across the pond? It's some weird guys with cool-looking shields, and wouldn't you know they're conquering everything. Yes, the Anglo-Normans, eventually becoming what we would know as the English throne, were taking power on the Big Island. And in the mid-late 1100s, they started making eyes at Ireland, and were even initially invited in willingly, both as consultants to bring a bunch of new European innovations to Ireland, as well as mercenaries to help with many internal Irish wars and clan conflicts. That would change in 1175, when King Henry II launched a full-scale invasion of Ireland and set up an English provisional government once again in Leinster, which would go on to take the name of the Pale. Coincidentally, this is where the English term of phrase beyond the pale comes from, like something so atrocious and outrageous that's completely beyond the pale, can't even think about it. That's how the English thought about the rest of Ireland. And especially during the early days of English rule, their control over Ireland was really substantial. They imposed all sorts of restricted laws. They set up an Irish parliament full of only Anglo-Irish people and tried to shut down Irish social and cultural traditions as best they could. However, towards the 1300s, this control started to wane, with many Irish dynasties like the O'Neills, as previously mentioned, and some newer ones like the O'Briens and the O'Connors starting to regain a little bit more of their influence, especially within nominally independent Ireland. Because just as with the Vikings, Ireland was never fully conquered by the English. Now, this leads us to the 1300s AD, when there was a massive Gaelic revival. A lot more Gaelic influence and culture started to burst forth at the seams, and they started to win some notable victories in minor skirmishes and even larger scale battles against the English invaders. The English countered by trying to reassert power in about the 1360s with some really severe laws forbidding intermarriage and a couple of other things. But by this point, the rest of Ireland beyond the Pale was starting to become more unified against the English in the southeast. They began to raid and harass the fringes of English society, creating this oppressive air of constant threat and forcing the English to cycle through dozens upon dozens of local magnates and deputies trying to impose some sense of order upon the region, but all failing completely into the 1500s AD. They almost got rid of the English for good, but that is up until a young woman rose to the throne named Liz I. And if you know anything about Elizabeth I, you know that she was a very effective leader, and she sure hated Catholicism. Because of this, Elizabeth I passed in the 1560s the Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity. This made Protestant Anglicanism the official state religion of Ireland, as well as make all Irish religious institutions subservient to the English state. And this was a step too far for the Irish people. They rebelled viciously, resulting in 3 substantial uprisings over the next 40 years. Some of them got close. The first rebellion, in fact, even managed to court the support of not only Rome, but also the Spanish and French. For a while there, it looked like England would get outflanked by this tiny upstart island nation that didn't want to become Protestant. Irish rebels even got official papal approval to launch a crusade against Elizabeth I. You remember that time in history when England was fucking crusaded by the Irish, don't you? Well, I sure as shit didn't. That's incredible. Why haven't I not heard about that before? So yeah, England got crusaded against. Unfortunately, it didn't work at all. All three of these rebellions were put down one after another, with the first one being successful up until it wasn't, the second being a complete shit show, and the third one making inroads and then ending in tragedy, leading us right up into the tail end of the AoE2 relevant time frame in 1600 AD. For the next couple hundred years, Ireland would continue to fight the English yoke on and off. It would continue to be a great country divided, but finally, nowadays, we can safely say that Ireland is free, at least as free as it's been for a long time, from English hegemony, as well as finally being free from its brutish and thuggish reputation across Europe, which would be used to justify atrocities against the Irish people for almost 800 years. And yet, despite all of this awful persecution and constant attacks on their homeland and sovereignty, the Irish have retained a proud cultural tradition and legacy, including among their many different diaspora communities, such as in Boston, where I grew up. With that all being said, let's move on to the flavor section, some of the beautiful aesthetic details that make Age of Empires civilizations what they are. Beginning with the architecture. It's Western European, what a surprise, with unique skins for the monastery, a very important building for the Irish, and the castle. The language the Irish would speak would be Middle Irish, Felta, ladies and gentlemen. I should note that the Celts in-game right now also speak Middle Irish, though from what I could see, it's not like brilliantly accurate, and so if the current voice lines were to be used, I wouldn't be too upset, but I'd personally prefer to see a bit of an overhaul of them to make them a little bit more historical. Moving on, their wonder would be the beautiful Rock of Cashel. This fantastic castle was added to over a period of like several hundred years, building by building by building, and remains one of the most spectacular pieces of architecture in all of the country, though there are many other excellent ones to choose from. In terms of some interesting AI player names, if you want to see any of those, take a look on screen right now, and make sure if you want to see details on these or anything else, to follow the link down in the description to take a look at my comprehensive civilization document. Let's move on from here, however, to some possible campaigns. Beginning, of course, with Brian Boru. Not only is he the founder of the O'Brien dynasty, second probably only to the O'Neills in terms of their influence within Irish history, not only was he the greatest High King of all Ireland and the first one the country had had in several hundred years, not only did he boot all of the Danes out of Ireland and die in the process, but he also developed an incredibly good reputation among the Irish for imposing taxes across the country that entirely went towards rebuilding the devastation wrought by the Norse. A king beloved for imposing taxes. The pigs are going to start flying outside any minute now, I just know it. He's an obvious pick for an Irish campaign protagonist, and the game would be foolish not to include him, but I want to mention some other good ones as well, such as Columcille, or Saint Columba, as you might know him better. He lived almost 500 years earlier than Brian Boru, in the early 500s AD. He was a member of the O'Neill dynasty during its early days of prominence, and was a powerful and effective military commander among them, winning many battlefield victories against dynastic contenders. However, towards the end of his life, Columcille became introspective, and began to regret the blood that he had spilled in the pursuit of family glory. So what did he do? He retired to Scotland and founded a monastery, Iona Monastery, which is one of the most famous in all of the British Isles, as well as one of the earliest major monastic institutions in all of Europe. He would never raise a sword again, but instead devoted himself to administration within his monastery. A really interesting character with a very nuanced story who left a truly enduring legacy. I think that he would make almost as good a campaign protagonist as would Brian Boru. And lastly, of the campaign protagonists I want to spotlight, we come to Shane O'Neill, a much later member of the O'Neill clan, living a millennium after Columcille in the 1500s AD. Shane O'Neill was the first of the great Irish rebels fighting against Queen Elizabeth's acts of supremacy and uniformity. So he was effectively a Catholic freedom fighter and proved himself to his fellow Irishmen by driving out Scottish migrants, as well as Anglo-Irish who defied the common cause of Catholic independence. He negotiated very effectively with England, even meeting Queen Elizabeth herself face-to-face on several occasions, but was eventually assassinated and his rebellion used as justification to confiscate a ton of O'Neill lands, which led to the downfall of the dynasty after literally 1,100 years of dominance. A character with a noble cause on paper who could be played with a lot more nuance than many other great unifying heroes, who, while not successful, stands as one of the greatest and most effective Irish freedom fighters in all of history. Let's move on to a couple of potential appearances of this Irish civilization in existing campaigns. I got one for you. It's York. And unfortunately, beyond that, not much else. The Irish aren't really brilliantly represented in-game, but that's okay, we at least have one. Let's round this section off with a couple of other potential campaign ideas, not as good as the three listed here, but still definitely worth a mention, beginning with Niall ní Gallach. Niall of the Nine Hostages, begetter of the great O'Neill family dynasty, largely legendary, but probably historical at least to some degree. He was the last High King of all Ireland until Brian Boru 600 years later, and lived at the very beginning of the AoE2 relevant time frame. It's said that in addition to a bunch of other definitely mythical scenarios he was involved with, he battled the Britons, the Welsh, Proto-Scots, Picts, French, and even the Romans, though that last one is almost certainly fake. But it's kind of hard to distinguish fantasy from reality when looking through his story. Second, rebellions of the Counter-Reformation. I've mentioned Shane O'Neill here, but as I mentioned earlier as well, there were two other rebellions against English Protestantism that the Irish attempted to launch. The first one being Shane's Rebellion, followed by the Desmond Rebellion. This is the one that actually managed to land papal approval to launch a crusade against Queen Elizabeth, which I just think is absolutely wild, but it ended in absolute disaster and was later superseded by the Tyrone Rebellion, also led by a pair of O'Neill brothers, as it would happen, which gained papal and Spanish support and looked like it was going somewhere until it was destroyed by an English surprise attack, which murdered its allies and forced it to surrender formally in 1603. This would bring us just beyond the AoE2 relevant time frame, so I can understand if that's maybe crossing a line for some people, but I still think that a campaign that maybe had two scenarios devoted to each of the three phases of this massive series of rebellions could be really interesting and a great way to paint a much more effective and complete picture of the era and its struggles. I also want to touch upon another potential multifaceted campaign, namely the Saints of Éire. Columcille was, of course, known as Saint Columba by many, but he was just one of a great many very famous Irish saints that greatly shaped the culture and mythological ethos of Ireland during the Middle Ages and even beyond. You may have heard of some of them, like Saint Bridget, or Saint Killian, or Saint Aidan, the bishop who founded Lindisfarne. But most famous among them all, even more than Columcille, would be, of course, Saint Patrick, who is probably a real guy, but also, again, has a lot of mythology wrapped up in his story. Mythology definitely would be the main thing standing in the way of this Saints of Éire campaign really feeling right in Age of Empires, but I still think something cool could be done with it, with maybe each saint getting one scenario as you trot your way through the early Middle Ages and see how Irish Christianity developed. And the last campaign I want to touch upon would be that of Rory O'Conor, or Rory O'Connor, if you want to use the anglicized version of the name. He was the last High King of all Ireland, ruling in the mid-1100s AD during Henry II's invasion. He fought valiantly against the English, but was eventually forced back to his homeland of Connacht, and was allowed a lot more autonomy than other Irish local rulers once Henry took over the country, laying the groundwork for continued Irish independence even as it was occupied for centuries to come. A very interesting character with some serious battlefield successes, but my issue with his hypothetical campaign is that it would pretty much only be Irish and English, not really any other civilizations involved, and for me, that's a big downside. And with that all being said, let's round off this history section with some major themes, overarching patterns I noticed emerging as I was reading through Irish history, beginning with the idea of Ireland as being made up of kingdoms within kingdoms. If you've seen my Scottish or Welsh builds recently, go take a look up there if you haven't seen the Welsh one yet. A lot of Celtic powers during the Middle Ages were highly decentralized. Few urban centers, lots of local clans, each with their own leadership, authority, and dynamics and feuds and hierarchy, and Ireland was no exception. Unlike other Celtic peoples, however, Ireland actually had a really effective proto-bureaucracy backing up this decentralization. You can think of medieval Ireland as being made up of nested hierarchies. You'd have like a family leader who would pay homage to a village leader, who would pay homage to a larger clan leader, who would pay homage to a provincial leader, who would pay homage to a high king. And yes, this did lead to tons upon tons of internal wars and feuds and divisions, which were all exacerbated by and played on by incoming invaders, but it actually led to Ireland's overwhelmingly rural economy being shockingly well managed, with social castes broken down into minute detail and the tributes and tithes owed both to their superiors and those superiors also measured and regulated incredibly effectively. This meant that while Ireland was plagued with internal division and was pretty much perpetually militarized for the entirety of the Middle Ages, it was still able to muster and supply very, very large armies, unlike a great many other decentralized kingdoms you see throughout the history of the world at large. A second major theme was Ireland's early adoption of Christianity. Like I said, they converted in the 500s, way before the Isles, and were substantially more effective at converting their neighbors than even Rome itself, which is not something you might expect from a people lambasted by the rest of Europe as barbarians. As I also mentioned, they have one of the oldest and most robust monastic traditions in all of Europe, educating pretty much all the nobility of the Isles right up until the 1000s AD, and as you may have inferred from their many rebellions, they were very resistant to anything anti-Catholic, fighting against Protestantism and Anglicanism, even while under absolutely brutal English suppression. Lastly, I would describe Irish warfare as being momentum-based. As mentioned above, armies were very, very large, and the tactic tended to be charging your opponent, overrun them, or die horribly and rout. Irish soldiers tended to be very brave, very agile, very lightly armored, and were really good at blitzing in on top of an opponent and overwhelming them before they really had a chance to adapt and react. But this strategy did have substantial downsides, particularly its endurance, with even their most elite units not being nearly as well armored as many of the armies they were fighting against, and most of their light conscripts rarely wearing more than a tunic. The Irish were described by the English as an onrushing tide, and much like a wave crashing upon the shore, if you can hold, they'll slink back from where they came from. If not, you'll be swamped. And with that, we come to the end of this Irish history section. If that's all you were here for, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe before you leave. But for all those of you who, like me, love Age of Empires and want to see what I've done with this Irish build, let's move on to the game mechanics, beginning with some necessary updates. If you've seen the Welsh and Scottish videos, you know that I want to bring a whole bunch of cool regional units to the British Isles, beginning with the Galaglas. This would be available to the Scots and to a lesser degree the Welsh, and would be a heavy infantryman trained from the castle, but Galaglas trained by your allies would actually keep all bonuses and unique technology benefits that your own Galaglasses have. And on teams with multiple Galaglas sourcing players, these benefits stack, allowing for truly terrifying units depending on your team composition and what interesting combinations of things you can share with your fellows. Now, the Galaglas is quite a tanky and high damage unit, though it is fairly slow, and like the Wrath, it can swap between two weapons, both of which are melee weapons. One, a two-handed great axe called a Sparth that pierces armor, and the second, a great two-handed claymore sword that deals splash damage. This makes the Galaglas very apt at dealing with all sorts of different enemy army comps, assuming it is able to fight in melee. The Galaglas is fairly expensive, costing 30 food and 65 gold, and as you will soon see, is one of the cornerstones of the Irish playstyle. The second regional unit the Irish have access to is the Hobelar. Now, this unit is a replacement for the Hussar upgrade, much like the Winged Hussar is for the Poles and Lithuanians. And the Hobelar upgrade is substantially cheaper to research than the normal Hussar upgrade. Hobelars are substantially weaker than Hussars in terms of their raw attack and damage, but they're a little bit faster. They cost 5 less food, and they gain an attack bonus when they are behind their target, while also ignoring the hitboxes of any other units besides Hobelars. This makes them amazing flankers, able to zip through enemy lines to snipe siege, get behind enemies to attack them from their back for bonus damage, and are quite good at raiding efficiently due to their increased speed and reduced cost. That being said, they are much worse as core frontline units than Hussars are. You're not going to get nearly as much value out of right-clicking all your stables on a location and spamming them during late-game trash wars. The Hobelar would be gained not only by the existing Britons, but also this Irish build, the Scots, and the Welsh, plus maybe a few other builds to come in future. Now, in addition to these two, the Irish also receive one other unit that I've touched upon in past builds, namely the Catapult Galley. This is not a regional unit, it's actually a common unit, more akin to a camel in terms of its availability. It was originally a unique unit on my Vandal build, go check that out here if you haven't seen it, and now is a common replacement for the Cannon Galleon available in Castle Age. It's substantially weaker, but it's cheaper, quicker to create, and has a better blast radius. You could say, oh wow, this is really similar to the Dromon. I came up with this thing before the Dromon came out. Thank you very much. And it's a lot more thematically appropriate for a lot more civilizations than just Mediterranean ones. The Irish have access to both the Catapult Galley and its elite upgrade in Imperial Age, which gives them a very respectable coastline bombardment unit. Let's move on to an overview of the civilization. The Irish, a levy and monk civilization. First bonus, this is a complicated one. Blacksmith attack upgrades give bonus damage versus low HP enemies. Armor upgrades give a dodge shield. Now, that sounds unbelievably broken, I know, but as we'll get to later on in the tech tree overview, the Irish lack every single Castle Age blacksmith upgrade. They go straight from Fletching to Bracer in Imperial Age, meaning that you're missing out on a huge Castle Age power spike, but you're compensated for it with some really interesting tactical options across your entire army from Feudal Age to post-Imperial. The total amount of benefit you get out of the attack bonus actually gives the Irish substantially better DPS on all their units than a generic civilization would, against enemies with less than 50% HP, of course, while the dodge shield makes the Irish much better in hit-and-run situations where they don't have to sit in combat for a long period of time. As you might expect, this bonus is trying to work with Irish momentum-based warfare, conveying that feel that if they swarm in and hit the enemy really hard and just absolutely massacre them, they're going to do really well, but if they stay in for a long time and can't crack the enemy's defenses, they will lose horribly. Second bonus. Levies, again, infantry, archers, and cavalry that do not cost gold, gain between 5 and 15% extra rate and fire from Feudal to Imperial Age. They also gain that much speed when moving to attack a target within their line of sight. If you've ever screwed around with the hunting dog, you'll know what I'm talking about here. That unit is pretty slow when it's trotting around, but if you right-click it on an enemy, it will start to sprint at them and gain a speed bonus. All Irish levies do the same, but only against units that are within their line of sight, meaning they're really good at closing the distance. Ireland's armies were overwhelmingly made up of conscripts, and these conscripts, as mentioned earlier, were renowned for their bravery and speed. Because of this, Irish levies have quite good damage output, as well as some really interesting strategic options enabled by this and the blacksmith technologies bonus enumerated above. Third bonus, block printing is free from Castle Age. Ooh, that means you have 12 range monks automatically. Very, very scary. It's the main Irish monk bonus and can make even one Irish monk in Castle Age a substantial threat, especially on the defense. Why is this here? Well, both to represent how effective the Irish were at proselytizing the rest of England, and to reference the fact that the Irish developed their own written script, Ogham, well before many of the other peoples in the British Isles, probably with help from very early Christian missionaries coming to them in the 300s AD. It's a powerful bonus that can be truly disgusting in early Castle Age, which, as you'll soon see, is when the Irish tend to be weakest. Fourth bonus. All feudal economy technologies besides wheelbarrow are free. You get them the second you advance to the feudal age. This is in direct reference to how effective the Irish rural economy was despite its decentralization. Now, of course, this economic benefit is not going to be as effective later in the game, much in the same way that Ireland's own rural economy was not really able to sustain the nation into the later stages of the AoE2 relevant timeframe, but it will give you a great early bonus and help you build up your early armies that much more effectively. Team bonus time. Each monastery technology discounts the next technology you research, besides aging up, proportionate to its gold cost. This is another fairly complicated one, and it's best illustrated with a couple of examples. Let's say I research faith. That costs 1,000 gold. That means that if I then research Heavy Scorpion, for example, Heavy Scorpion will cost 1,000 fewer resources. And the order of operations is gold is prioritized first, then stone, then food, then wood. So the Heavy Scorpion technology, instead of costing something like, 800 food and 900 wood, would only cost 700 wood. All 800 food discounted, plus 200 more. Note that Faith's food cost is not counted in this calculation. So what will this team bonus exactly accomplish? It'll allow you and any of your allies who are teching into the monastery to get some really nice dividends on your other technologies, almost making your monastery technologies free if you are choosing what to research strategically. I should also note, by the way, that if you don't spend all of the gold credit you gain from a specific monastery technology, it'll roll over to the next one. So if you research Illumination, which is I think 120 gold, and then you use that to discount Town Watch, which is only 75 food, you'll still have 45 more credit for the next technology you research. Once again, this bonus is in reference to how effectively Ireland educated and groomed the entirety of the British Isles, both for success in their own home domains and to spread Christianity to their own peoples. Irish monasteries were some of the most elite learning institutions in all of Europe during the early Middle Ages, and this bonus is trying to capture the essence of that fact. Let's move on to their unique units, beginning with their castle unique unit, the Bonald. This is a trash unit costing only 50 food and 25 wood. It is a light, quick, low-power infantry, kind of comparable to an Eagle Warrior, but it has -1 pierce armor, so it gets absolutely obliterated by arrows, which the Irish were known to do on a number of occasions. Now, the Bonald is substantially worse than the Eagle Warrior, which makes sense because it's a trash unit, but it does get a better attack bonus versus cavalry, though it has 0 other attack bonuses to speak of. Additionally, it also reduces the attack power of any cavalry unit it harms for a couple of seconds by something like 25%. The effect is not stacked, it's just reapplied. Lastly, and more interestingly, as a Bonald is moving to engage an enemy, it will throw a couple of javelins in very rapid succession. Almost like, imagine a Chukonu that was running into melee combat, shooting as it did so. Once the Bonald reaches melee combat, it fights normally. And this Javelin Flurry is an ability with a recharge bar, taking something like 6 seconds to recharge, and only able to do so while the Bonald is out of combat. These Javelins do have a little bonus versus cavalry, and apply the reducing cavalry attack effect as well. What a weird unit, right? How the hell did I come to this? Well, first of all, after getting stomped into the ground by Anglo-Norman and English knights for a couple of centuries, the Irish actually became pretty good at dispersing cavalry charges, and one of the ways they did so is with javelins. One English commenter even noted that while javelins were not very effective at actually killing people, they were very good at frightening horses with them, making it so that a horse charging into combat would veer off to the side and not want to complete its charge. To this end, the Bonald is less of a hard counter to cavalry like the halberdier is, and is instead more of a detractor of cavalry, weakening them for your other units to pounce on, while itself being quite fast and a good deal better against non-cavalry units than the spear line is to compensate. Oh, and the Javelin Flurry thing is in reference to the fact that many Irish warriors carried a trio of javelins with them wherever they went. The Irish were famed for their javelins. It's the weapon that was most associated with them throughout all of the Middle Ages. And speaking of javelins, the Irish have a second unique unit that is javelin themed, that being the Kern. This is a unique upgrade to the Skirmisher, available in Castle Age instead of the Elite Skirmisher. And the Kern is a little bit tankier and faster than a skirmisher, but it doesn't receive the additional bonus damage versus archers and cavalry archers that the elite skirmisher upgrade normally unlocks. Instead, Kerns are able to fight in melee combat. You might see in my little picture there, they have a little knife poking out from their shield. And this was pretty typical of Irish warriors of the day. They would fight with javelins and then move to a small shield and dagger once they entered hand-to-hand fighting. And the Kern's melee attack is a little bit stronger than their normal ranged attack, while still doing full bonus damage against all archer units. This makes the Kern a much more strategically versatile unit and is less suck against cavalry. It will at least be able to fight instead of just running away when it's being ridden down by horses. Additionally, the Kern is able to upgrade to the Wood Kern in Imperial Age. The Wood Kern is substantially stronger, actually posing a threat to a number of units besides archers, and while its bonus damage still isn't anything special, it gains the ability to walk through forests. Ooh, very exciting. If you haven't seen my Silesians build yet, go check that out here. This works exactly like my Raubritter unique unit in that particular build. Namely, while the Wood Kern is in forests, it's much slower, its line of sight is reduced to 1, and it cannot attack whatsoever. Still, a very scary raiding unit. Your enemy's wood lines will never be safe. Oh, and as a fun little note, if you have a Vietnamese ally, then your Wood Kerns can upgrade to Imperial Wood Kerns, receiving the same bonuses that an elite skirmisher would if it were to upgrade to an Imperial skirmisher. Lastly, let's talk about their 2 unique technologies, starting with Ken Adamnan. This allows your monks to be briefly invulnerable when first trained, and makes all eco units, namely villagers, trade carts, fishing ships, etc., invulnerable completely when within 2 tiles of a monastery. Quite a defensive technology. The monk invulnerability is like 30 seconds, by the way, so it's easily enough for them to get a conversion off, and will make night raids on your base way harder for your enemy to pull off successfully once it has been researched. The eco unit thing will also be very useful, though bear in mind, if your eco units are huddled around a monastery, they are not producing resources. So because of that, this technology is mostly like a side-use utility technology that has some decent defensive implications, but definitely shouldn't be what you are defaulting to when you are playing the Irish. Remember, your enemy can just wait for your monk to stop being invulnerable, or they can just destroy your monastery if they want to get all the juicy villagers underneath it. Before I move on, the Ken Adamnan was a series of religious laws that was effectively like an early Geneva Convention, saying that non-combatants should not be harmed during war, and was imposed pretty effectively for several hundred years. Moving on, second unique technology, Coinmate. This makes it so that all of your levy units as well as your galaglasses have minus 10% cost and take 10% less population space. Ooh, very, very exciting indeed. Now, the Coinmate was the term for the mass quartering and provisioning of Irish troops by locals. It was expected that whenever Irish soldiers were in town, Irish people living there should give them a place to stay and give them food without charge, no questions asked. While this wasn't exactly like a beloved tradition of the country by any means, no one likes being forced to give stinky soldiers free food, it was way more tolerated than you might expect and probably would have been in other countries, and was adopted and adjusted by every invader that the Irish had, from the Vikings to the English. Remember, this Coinmate effect will be passed to your allies' galaglasses as well, making that unit that much more desirable for your allies to use if they decide to go into it. As always, if you want any of the specific details on any of these bonuses, and I wouldn't blame you if you did, there's some complicated ones here, make sure to take a look at the civilization document down in the description below. Let's move on to the tech tree for the Irish. Letter grades, Spirit of the Law style, beginning with their infantry. It's a B+. They have their unique Bonnock unit, they have the regional Galaglass, and they have the powerful Coinmate technology. Though I should note that Coinmate, as well as their levy and blacksmith bonuses, are relevant to their infantry, archers, and cavalry. Note though that, as mentioned before, they miss chainmail armor, though they do still get plate mail armor, and they don't even get the two-handed swordsman. So while they have some strong infantry options, with the elite Galaglass being their go-to power unit in late game and their trash being very, very good, it's not a building that you need to be producing out of to win every game you're in. Moving on to their archers, it's a B. They have the mighty Kern evolving into the even mightier Wood Kern, and they even have hand cannoneers in late game if you want, but they miss Arbalester, Thumb Ring, and Leather Archer armor. And Leather Archer armor is not the worst thing in the world, though your Castle Age crossbows will really wish they had it, but not having Arbalester or Thumb Ring is pretty toasty for their late game archer potential. That being said, the Wood Kern is very, very strong, benefiting from all of those bonuses I mentioned earlier, and having hand cannoneers can be nice. Cavalry. It's a B as well. They have the Hobilar, but they don't even have Cavaliers. They're stuck with Knights, and they don't have chain barding armor. Their Hobilars are very, very good though, so much like with infantry and archers, you'll build stables to get access to the amazing levy unit inside, but not much else. Siege, it's a C-. Kinda doo-doo. They don't have siege engineers, siege rams, siege onager, or bombard cannons, so all of the late game siege power units are off the table for them, but you'll still use siege now and then, and onagers are nice to have around. They do have those at least. Defenses. It's a C. They do have Can Adamnan, which is something at least, but they miss Bombard Tower, Keep, Architecture, Arrow Slits, and even Town Patrol. So as the Irish, the main defensive tool you have are your monks, and those are very good and will be a very respectable defense, but besides that, only your castles are really at all acceptable. Economy, it's a B. They miss guilds, which sucks. But they do have those free feudal age upgrades, which are great. Their economy is pretty much a generic late game, but the free monastery tech bonus will at the very least substantially discount you going into those extremely expensive units, which I at least partially count as an economy bonus. Particularly because you share it with your allies and you can be kind of versatile in how you spend the discounts that you accrue. Levies. This is where we get to the good stuff. It's an A. They have the Woodkern, they have the Bonnacht, they have the Hobilar, they have Coinmid. This civilization is built for levy warfare. They will destroy late game trash wars. Their levy bonus is huge. The Smith bonus is especially relevant for trash wars late game. And while they seriously lack for power units, they do have the elite Galogloss, which is especially good in late game trash wars. So levies, it's an A for the Irish. Dock, it's a B. They have the Catapult Galley and the Elite Catapult Galley, which are great, and Shipwright, but they miss Careening, which kinda sucks. As well as Demolition Ship, but who cares about that? So, as the Irish, you'll have some good stuff on water. In fact, you might even see them being quite good on early game water because of their free feudal age economy bonuses. Besides that, though, it's not really a civilization you'll be defaulting to on island-type maps. And lastly, for monks, it's an A. Their free early block printing bonus is exceptional, and they have a perfect monastery besides heresy. Not only that, but they have the team bonus, making it so that your monastery technologies are free, with exceptions, and they have Can Adamnan to provide some much needed early defense and allow monks that you produce in the face of enemy rushes and the like to be extra protected. A very good monastery tech tree, but not quite worthy of an A+. Now that we have an idea of what the Irish tech tree looks like, let's take a look at how they might actually play out in practice, beginning with their early game. Much like my Welsh build, again, take a look if you haven't seen it yet, they have a completely average Dark Age, but a awesome Feudal Age. Though it's for totally different reasons than why the Welsh were good in their build. For the Irish, all of their rushes are quite strong. Their blacksmith technologies have really great effects in Feudal Age. Even just +1 bonus damage on enemies below 50% is going to make a lot of difference in those early skirmishing fights, and you get some nice little dodge shield benefits. On top of that, your scouts benefit from your levy speed and attack rate bonus, making them absolutely vicious raiders, and your archers and men-at-arms are both perfectly respectable. You could even do one of my favorite old vintage tactics and do trash rushes and trash warfare in Feudal Age. Your eco is also, of course, very decent, and is going to be one of the main reasons that your rushes are so good. Get all the technologies free, though after that, it's going to be fairly generic. So in summary, the Irish start the game off really, really strong, but into mid-game, things start to slow down. They do get some really interesting options opening up to them. Galoglass are cool, the Kern are cool, they have Bonnacht available, but all of these units have serious flaws. Their knights and crossbows, I guess you could say, are playable, though neither of them can be upgraded, and both of them are missing key upgrades. But on top of everything, they're all missing their Castle Age blacksmith upgrades. Imagine how crippling that is against an evenly matched opponent. If you haven't really tilted the odds in your favor in Feudal Age, you're going to struggle as the Irish into Castle Age. Your main defense are your monks. They're going to be your greatest asset. Getting 12 range on monks in Castle Age is colossal, and one conversion can win the day for you if you manage to tag an enemy knight at an inopportune moment. This will also make the Irish do really well on maps like Arena, especially if they have a little bit of time to get out Can Adamnan, which will make you even more effective at resisting late Castle Age / early Imperial Age pushes by your opponent, especially those Spanish clowns who just spam conquistadors. Those guys can go to hell, literally. I'll convert them and then delete them to send them there myself. Moving on to late game, however, the Irish start to get good again. First of all, they start to get to the late game much faster than normal thanks to their monastery bonus. Not to say that Imperial Age itself will be discounted, but once you're there, you'll be able to pick up your expensive late game unit technologies a lot more efficiently if you're also improving your monks at the same time. But then it is time to levy Floyd! You have Coinmid supplying you an infinite army of halberdiers and woodkerns and hobelars and bannocks. You have some very powerful units at your disposal, and the smith technologies, on average, are going to even out as a positive, I am going to guess. Yes, you will have some weaknesses. Yes, if you're not using your units wisely, they're going to get stomped in many situations. You can't just spam as the Irish. Well, you can, but you're not going to be using your units optimally. By employing just a little bit of strategy to make optimal use of your levy unit's speed and innate counter damage and bonuses versus enemies at low health and dodge shields and all these other things, your late game Irish army can be absolutely frickin' unstoppable. And as well it should if you manage to make it through their crappy mid game. I should note though that the Irish late game is not completely without fault. They do have very few power units. No Cavaliers, no Arbalesters, it sucks. They do have hand cannoneers as mentioned before, which are nice, but the main thing you'll be defaulting to is your elite Galaglass. So be careful of power. If you're strategic, you shouldn't have trouble cracking through enemy power, but in terms of delivering the haymaker to your opponent, you might be lacking if you're not teching into the elite Galaglass. And with that all said, let's wrap up this build with a couple of loose threads, beginning with some uncertainties, things that weren't quite resolved for me by the time I was wrapping up the build. For one, the Irish in this build do have a very swingy military. Historically speaking, it makes a lot of sense, but it might be kind of fussy in practice, and they are also quite weak to very strong champions because of their emphasis on trash and only having the hand cannoneer as a decent counter unit. More importantly though, this build is quite complex, even by my standards. The monastery technology discount bonus and especially the blacksmith technology bonus are both quite elaborate, and I don't know if they'd be well received, though I personally think they are very well historically justified and would be quite fun in practice, but a lot of people really shy away from complexity in Age of Empires 2. Lastly, this build has invulnerability mechanics, and if I've learned one thing on YouTube, invulnerability is controversial. I think this is balanced. It's limited on your monks, and your villagers can't harvest while they're doing it, so it can't be that bad, right? Right? I hope I'm right. You guys will tell me otherwise, I'm sure, down in the comments section below. Let's round it off with some tabled ideas, thoughts, and stuff that didn't quite make the build, but I'd be remiss not to mention. One, I had a ton of other thoughts for what their levies could do. What if they had bonus damage versus their traditional counters, like skirmishers doing better against cavalry, for example? What if levies had less bonus damage overall, but more base attack, kind of like I did in my own Romans build? What if they could attack while moving at like 50% rate of fire? You'll notice that I folded a lot of these ideas into things like the Bonnocht and Woodkern, but it still was something I was considering for all their levies writ large. Another one, what if all of your soldiers had like a charge attack? Or the Smith technologies grant this instead of the attack bonus versus enemies with low HP. I thought this could be super cool and really represent like the swinginess of Irish warfare well, but charge attacks are not like super well liked. I'm pretty happy with how I've implemented them in the past, but it's not really the sort of thing I think you can give to every single unit on a roster and not expect some pushback over. Not to mention, that would mean 2 recharging bars on every unit, a dodge shield and a charge attack. I mean, I can think of ways to make it work, but that sounds like a lot to me. Next, here's one of my favorite ones. What if all enemy soldiers took a very slow damage over time for every enemy building of that player's you're attacking at any given moment? Minus like farms and wall segments and dumb stuff. Where did I get this idea from? Well, like I said, with both the Vikings and the English, once the hegemony started to become weak, the Irish started embarking on this like terror campaign, effectively, like attacking them at every corner, making their populace live in a constant state of fear. And my best idea to represent that sort of like guerrilla warfare breaking down the opponent's spirit was by making it such that attack notifications would slowly cripple the enemy over time. I was very tempted to add this one, but there just didn't feel like there was room for it on the build. Another one, monastery stuff. What if they could research unique technologies, or even age ups for that matter? What if they could train unique units, or like really slowly convert nearby enemies? There was a bunch of things I thought about for the monastery. I knew the civilization needed to have a focus on the monastery, but none of these really manifested, and I really liked the technology bonus that I ended up going with. What if monks could garrison in fortifications, and while garrisoned would automatically convert passersby like they were shooting them? Love this idea, but it felt a little too defensive, you know? Another one for monks. What if healing had an area effect? What if conversion had an area effect? Ooh, that's very exciting. It would kind of allow the monks to complement the levies a little bit better if they could heal in an AoE, such that they could like heal up a ton of levies at once rather than just doing one at a time. But healing kind of sucks, and I really preferred the block printing bonus because it felt more targeted, so these ones ended up getting scrapped. Plus the conversion AoE I think would be absolutely despised. Another one. My Georgian build, take a look here if you haven't seen it yet, unless I am running out of those little YouTube tab things, in which case don't take a look there. I had the idea to maybe steal the feudal age monastery stuff I put on my Georgian build and put it here, but I like it on the Georgians quite a lot, so that didn't really end up happening, though I think it would be quite fitting on this build as well. Another one, the Irish hired English mercenaries quite frequently and made heavy use of English longbowmen on their battlefields. What if they got the regional longbowman unit I mentioned in my Welsh build, but don't get the elite upgrade? That would be a really interesting dynamic, I think. I didn't like them having another potential Castle Age power unit, especially one that was very, very subpar in Castle Age and couldn't upgrade in Imperial Age, so it just felt like a step too far. And let's round it off with two other thoughts. One, a unique technology, Keren Kombala. This would be where I would put that like levy, rate of fire, and movement speed bonus if it didn't feel good as a civilization bonus. I really liked it there, but there's a chance it could be a little too powerful if it was not gated behind a technology. The Keren Kombala was like a retainer band of professional mercenaries and made up a large body of later Irish armies while still being derived from earlier practices of Irish mass conscription. So it felt like a fitting place to put another levy effect of some kind. And lastly, a regional building. This is something I mentioned on my Scots build, but I really strongly considered giving like a Gaelic or British Isles wide regional building that's like a mini castle. A Dun or a Broch, these were the names of like early Dark Age Gaelic fortifications. Ring forts are another name for it, and the Cranach was like an island fort that cropped up all over Ireland and Scotland. Super freaking cool. I really was tempted to do it, but the build was getting a little busy and there's a lot of regional stuff already. Not to say that that would always deter me, but I want to draw a line somewhere, at least for now. But with all that being said, we come now to the end of this build. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. I hope you've enjoyed. Before we round off, let's take a look at the likeliness. In my estimation, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that the Irish, maybe looking something like this build, could appear in the game going forward? And on the likeliness, we have a 4.5 out of 10. Same grade I gave the Scots. I think it's possible, but it won't happen for a while. The Celts deserve to be split up. They are a silly civilization that sticks a whole bunch of completely discordant pieces together and claims that it represents 5 or 6 different completely distinct nationalities. That, to me, is silly. But that's just what I think. Now I want to hear what you have to say. How did you like my build? What would you do differently? Are there any elements of the history that you think I could have addressed better or more accurately or more faithfully? And most importantly, what else do you want to see from me on this channel going forward into the future? But until then, my name is Robbie Howell. Be sure to join us for the Theorycraft live stream on this channel this coming Sunday, July 16th at noon Eastern Daylight Time. And ciao for now.